in terms of getting close to the microphone issue I have. I will assure you that it was all insightful, helpful, thoughtful, responsible, measured. Not even funny, actually. All right. Item number 7. Mr. Howard.
Thank you. This item is a request from the North Coast region for cleanup and abatement account funding for a Eel River monitoring and water quality awareness pilot project. And we have James Mon and Nathan Jacobson are presenting, and I believe I saw Matt St. John here as well, who will be speaking.
Good morning, Chair Marcus and board members. My name is James Mon. I'm the acting Deputy Director for the Division of Financial Assistance. As Tom Howard just stated, the North Coast Water Board is requesting $209,566 from the Cleanup and Abatement account to fund public outreach and monitoring program. This effort is designed to increase public awareness about individual and cumulative adverse water quality impacts of improperly developed or managed crop cultivation, including marijuana cultivation, on private land within the Eel watershed. State Water Board staff reviewed the project as proposed and identified potential safety and legal concerns. We have included language in the resolution to help address these concerns, including a provision that will restrict field visits to grow sites where invitations by the property owner have been extended to project staff. We will also work closely with the regional board staff to develop a funding agreement that will control the disbursement of funds and minimize safety and legal concerns. The project will include developing best management practices to address water quality impacts, monitoring of in-stream temperatures and flows in the watershed, developing education and outreach materials, and providing technical assistance to local growers and small water districts to address water quality impacts. Staff does recommend the board fund the project as an initial program to help abate effects caused by water quality from marijuana cultivation. Unless there are questions for the staff here, I would recommend that the regional board make their presentation to the board. As was stated, Matt St. John is here with his staff.
Terrific. Mr. St. John.
Good morning, Chair Marcus and members of the board. My name is Matt St. John. I'm the Executive Officer at the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. I want to thank your staff for bringing this item to you for your consideration this morning. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to take about 10 minutes to speak to you to provide a little bit of background information about this project, to address, tell you about how my board has been addressing the problem associated with marijuana cultivation in the North Coast over the last couple of years, and then respond to your staff's concerns related to safety issues. It's been documented in a number of news articles throughout the state that the scale of marijuana cultivation throughout the state has been increasing significantly with detrimental impacts to water quality. Cultivation of marijuana in the North Coast region has grown exponentially in recent years, both in the number and size of operations. These grow operations are occurring both on private and public land, and some have described the increase in marijuana cultivation in the North Coast and its impact on the landscape as the gold rush or the green rush of our day. No one knows the true scope of the increased growing activity and the amount of water that's being diverted from streams in our local watersheds. However, a Department of Fish and Wildlife study of 2 small subwatersheds in the Eel River, South Fork of the Eel River in Humboldt County, using aerial imagery, indicates that the number of acres devoted to marijuana cultivation almost doubled from 2009 to 2012, with an estimated 550 individual growing operations and nearly 19,000 plants being grown in each of the watersheds. While some individuals are developing sites and diverting water for the cultivation of marijuana in accordance with water rights permits and other environmental laws, many individuals are not. In response to complaints, my staff and colleagues from other federal, state, and local agencies have observed some growers engaged in a variety of activities that are threatening or damaging the environment, including the following types of activities: grading, terracing, and dam building, as well as road construction without permits, leading to the filling of streams through erosion and sediment deposition, deforestation and fragmentation, habitat fragmentation, illegal use of rodenticides, fungicides, herbicides, and insecticides, use of soil amendments and fertilizers in situations where runoff can occur to surface waters, discarding of trash and haphazard management of human waste, substandard storage of hazardous materials such as diesel and gasoline, and, as I mentioned earlier, unauthorized diversion of water from streams. These activities are impairing beneficial uses of surface water, from municipal drinking water supplies to swimming, from agriculture to the preservation of habitat for aquatic and wildlife species. Over the past 5 years or so, the North Coast Regional Board has responded to the water quality impacts associated with marijuana cultivation through our enforcement program. Our office maintains a database to track information related to environmental complaints that we receive. And in the past few years, over half of these complaints have been related to activities associated with marijuana cultivation in the North Coast. One of our enforcement unit staff spends nearly all of his time responding to cases associated with this activity. And my enforcement unit staff participate in several environmental crimes task forces in Sonoma, Mendocino, Humboldt, and Trinity counties. And we partner with federal, state, and local governments to enforce applicable environmental laws. Since 2009, my board has issued dozens of cleanup and abatement orders and several ACLs for discharges of waste associated with these activities. And these enforcement actions have been successful. They've resulted in the cleanup and abatement of discharges of waste at these sites. The response, however, really represents just a drop in the bucket compared to the environmental impact that we know is occurring across the landscape in the North Coast. Therefore, we've come to the conclusion that an enforcement-only approach is not going to be successful, even with increased funding for enforcement. Let me be clear, we are encouraged and pleased by the governor's having allocated funds in the proposed state budget to state and regional boards to address these issues. We're grateful for this proposed additional funding, and we will make good use of additional staff to follow up on complaints and to take enforcement actions where necessary. However, given the scale of the problem, we do not believe that enforcement alone can fix the watershed scale water quality problems that we're seeing. My board members are very concerned about this very real water quality problem in the North Coast. In response to regular complaints and concerns voiced from a wide variety of stakeholders in our region, my board held 2 informational workshops in 2013 on the environmental impacts related to marijuana cultivation in the North Coast. In May, we heard from a panel panel presentation, including my staff, as well as representatives from California Department of Fish and Wildlife, CAL FIRE, U.S. Forest Service, BLM, and National Marine Fisheries Service. The panelists detailed the types of environmental impacts that they are seeing in our watersheds and described the interagency efforts that are being taken to address the environmental damage. A common theme that was described by each of the panelists was that the scale of the problem is daunting and that a multi-agency and multifaceted approach to addressing the environmental impacts is necessary. In September, my board directed me and my staff to develop a regulatory program to control the discharges of waste from marijuana cultivation operations on private land. And my staff are now in the process of developing a permit, which will be implemented as part of our irrigated land discharge program. And it's my anticipation that we will bring this permit to my board for consideration within the next year. So in addition to addressing the water quality impacts from marijuana cultivation through our existing and ongoing enforcement program and through our forthcoming regulatory program, we also believe that outreach and education is needed in order to address the problem and is to be part of the solution. We believe that a grassroots, community-based outreach and education program can have a meaningful and effective influence on human behavior, resulting in water quality benefits to the North Coast. Therefore, my board has partnered with the Mendocino County Resource Conservation District and the Eel River Recovery Project for this cleanup and abatement account request. And as Mr. Mon told you, this project is designed to increase public awareness about individual and cumulative adverse impacts of improperly developed or managed croplands, including marijuana cultivation on private land, and to educate growers about water conservation practices and management measures to prevent pollution from these activities. In addition, the project will include citizen monitoring of water quality and flow to better define the nature of flow depletion and pollution problems in the Eel River watershed. We believe the citizen monitoring component is critical because it helps create a foundation of community trust and provides a trend monitoring tool that can be used to measure the benefits of this project over time and for adaptive management in the long term. Our partners, the Mendocino RCD and the Eel River Recovery Project, are solidly rooted in the communities of the Eel River watershed. The RCD has a proven track record of working with landowners to implement best management practices to prevent erosion, restore riparian habitats, and improve in-stream conditions. And the Eel River Recovery Project has assembled a multidisciplinary team for this project to coordinate the citizen monitoring, develop educational materials, conduct trainings, and provide technical assistance on water conservation and best management or pollution prevention practices. Some of the measures of success for this project will include the number of participants that attend the public workshops and public trainings that will be held, the number of informational brochures that are distributed, the number of voluntary field visits to provide technical assistance, and water quality and flow data to track trends and assess the benefits of the project. All of the monitoring data will be presented at these public meetings and trainings, as well as being posted on the Eel River Recovery Project's website. Now I'd like to address staff's concerns related to staff's and contractors' safety. I want to assure you, as Mr. Mon said, that site visits to known marijuana cultivation sites will be restricted to invitation-only locations. Further, the public meetings and trainings will be held at public locations, not at locations where marijuana is cultivated. Water quality monitoring and flow monitoring will be conducted at public access locations or on private property at the invitation of the property owner. All technical assistance that will be provided to individual growers will only be provided at the voluntary request of the property owner. In fact, all project contractors will only go on a property when they have been invited to be there. Fundamental to the mission of the Resource Conservation District is the principle of providing voluntary technical assistance to landowners. Therefore, the project contractors will only go where they are invited, and we believe this greatly reduces any risk to the contractor's safety. So in summary, I'd like to emphasize the importance of this project. It provides the third leg to our three-pronged approach to combat the environmental impacts related to marijuana cultivation in the North Coast. That is outreach and education, in addition to our ongoing enforcement program and our developing regulatory program. Our partners of the Mendocino RCD and EERP are uniquely suited to provide meaningful and effective outreach efforts, and I believe their efforts can have a ripple effect throughout the communities of the Eel River watershed to change behavior and prevent further environmental damage. And as Mr. Mon mentioned, this project is designed as a pilot project. Any of the informational brochures and best management practice guides that are developed for this project can be replicated and distributed throughout the state. And information gained from project implementation can be transferred to other watersheds that are also experiencing the environmental impacts from marijuana cultivation. Given the state's severe drought conditions, the North Coast salmon-bearing streams are going to face a very, very critical condition this coming summer. These watersheds need all the help they can get to prevent pollution and maintain in-stream flows. And this project team is uniquely positioned to make a difference in protecting water quality in the Eel River watershed. So representatives of the RCD and the Eel River Recovery Project are here to make some very brief comments at your request or to answer any questions that you may have of them. And at this time, I'm happy to take any questions from you as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for working through some of those issues with our staff. And then, of course, your enforcement task force work with all of the other affected agencies, both environmental, law enforcement, and variety in the appropriate cases is where that effort will go.
That's right.
So, good. Questions? And we do have a few speaker cards. You should know you had advanced billing.
Okay.
Because some of your partners came and gave a very impassioned pitch in our public comment at our last meeting. It was a good preview. That was terrific. And we're happy to see them again today.
I'm not sure if this is a question for you or some of your partners. I'm happy for anyone to address. What has been some of the indications you've received in terms of the invitations that are expected? I'm glad to hear that we're not going to go where we're not invited, but what level of invitations and engagement and participation do you or your partners expect?
So the Eel River Recovery Project has held several what they've called water days over the last couple of years on their own through separate funding. And at these water days, they've had different speakers and held exhibits related to water conservation and pollution prevention. And it's been based on the attendance at those functions that we believe that there will be pretty widespread interest of parties to make
As-
use of the technical services that they can provide.
Okay, the people who have attended these events have any extended invitations to the RCDs, to you for assistance? Have any issue invitations? I guess I'm trying to ascertain what is the probability of participation and engagement from the growers in your area?
Well, I think at this time, why don't I ask Mr. Pat Higgins of the Eel River Recovery Project and Deborah from the RCD to come up and provide their perspective.
And that's fine. You know, I want to hear from them, but I had another question,
Sure.
maybe, and then they can give their presentations. And as you mentioned, Board Member Dodick, they can answer your question at that time. Does that sound good? Thank you. You know, on the topic of safety, there's no question. All regional board. I'm the liaison to the North Coast Board. You know, I know regional board members are concerned about that. Staff's concerned, but I think it might be worth noting, as you noted, for 2 years now, staff have been going out responding to complaints, as we do with other issues in the watershed, you know, that involves some degree of risk to staff. You know, I used to be staff. I accepted a certain amount of risk in that role in doing the swamp monitoring and that sort of thing. So as we look to this proposal, how would you characterize the risk associated with these type of activities relative to the risk that we take with our responding to complaints?
It can't be, it would be inappropriate for me to say that there's no risk. But I think that there's inherent risk in the type of work that we do. When my staff go to work with ranchers in the state of Jefferson and Siskiyou County to talk about developing ranch plans, there's risk. My point is, there's risk even when it's not an activity like marijuana cultivation. When my staff follow up on complaints related to marijuana cultivation activities, they only go with partner agencies. In some cases, they even go with law enforcement when there's a raid of some kind, and we've only participated in a few of those, but that's always with law enforcement. This type of situation is completely different. This is where there's a landowner who is engaging in this practice, this business, and they are seeking technical assistance from the contractors. And so they're contacting the contractors to say, would you come out and show me water conservation practices, pollution prevention practices? And it's at that time that the contractors would go out. They'd always go out with colleagues, but based on that voluntary approach, I think it significantly reduces any risk. Did that answer your question?
Yes,
Mr.
and I appreciate the context too, and that discussion of those dynamics of the real character of our work. Thank you.
Great. Why don't we turn to Mr. Higgins and Ms. Edelman,
Very good.
if that's right. Thank you very much. That was very well put.
Patrick Higgins, Eel River Recovery Project Volunteer Coordinator. And before responding to the question, I just want to say I really appreciate the amount of time that your staff has put in this and the North Coast Regional Board staff. And we are very, very grateful for the amount of work that's gone into this that will allow us to bring these resources to the people of the Eel River. And it is indeed a dire time in terms of water supply and emergency, which partly answers Tam's question. lots of people are going to be coming to us for water conservation advice because they're running out of water, Tam. And in an emergency year, if it rained 110 inches this year, we'd have fewer clients. But right now, we know from private purveyors of water systems and wells in the Eel that the phone is ringing off the hook. And that means also that people will be very, very interested in our water conservation technical assistance. There's also a tremendous schism, and one from the outside might get the feeling that in the Eel that there is this huge lawless community, but in fact there is a spectrum of people in terms of their impacts and the way they comport themselves and their legality other than the marijuana enterprise itself. And so we have a lot of responsible people out there, and they're taking umbrage that they're being broad-brushed and disparaged. And they want to actually have you come out and monitor to prove that their creek is actually recovering despite the fact that marijuana is being grown there. And I think at some point they'll be wanting to be, you know, kind of come and show our thing off and how you do this, but we're not going to do that. If we do any field trainings, they'll be at like dry farming truck vegetable sites. It will not be anything related to a marijuana enterprise. And so I think that was your question. Also with us, I'll let Deborah Stenger Edelman from the Mendocino RCD, which is our partner in this. We're very proud. They've got a huge, long track history of helping out with water quality and soil conservation. Bruce Hillback-Barger is from Covelo, who spoke to you in the comment period last month. A grassroots organizer. He's here to organize or help answer questions and to tell you about, you know, his end of things. And then we have Keith Boma-Gregson. He's a doctoral student from the University of California. He is really the sole force for organizing us on coping with toxic algae and collecting data when no other government agency is. And under this grant, we'll be able to assist small water districts that otherwise have no technical assistance and yet might have cyanotoxins in their water. So he drove from Berkeley. We want to expedite your business. I'm here to answer further questions. Otherwise, thanks very much.
Thank you.
But it is a dire emergency, and I hope that's reflected in your action.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Deborah Stanger Edelman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. I'm a watershed coordinator for the Mendocino County Resource Conservation District, and we are a glad partner in this project because Mendocino County is in the Emerald Triangle with a very large percentage of landowners having some form of marijuana cultivation on their land. And we recognize the impacts that Matt was talking about. So our interest is strictly in terms of watershed protection, and our role in this primarily will be developing the best management practices brochure for watershed protection for marijuana cultivators. As was mentioned, we have a long history, 68-year history of working with landowners. It's a trusted relationship. We never, for any reason, go to somebody's land without being invited. We're totally non-enforcement. We have no regulatory authority. And in addressing your question about whether there will be interest in this material, we have already developed a partnership with a local organization of legal medical marijuana growers who are asking us for the information. They want us to develop this guide, and they will be a conduit to the rest of the community for this information. We're going to be, our plan is to print 5,000 brochures, 1,500 of them in Spanish. And so we expect to reach at least that many people, and that's just the first step. I encourage you to consider funding this proposal. I think it's really important, as everyone said, in light of the drought. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about our role.
Great. Yeah, love working with RCDs. So
Thank you.
That's always great. Terrific. Mr. Hillback-Barger, do you any, and Diana Henriel? Oh, so you pronounce the L's. I'm sorry. Okay. I thought maybe that would be the...
Hi, I'll just briefly try to answer the question about grower interest and other interest in the community. Since I last spoke to you, and at that time I mentioned that I had distributed a brochure to the grow stores in Round Valley, a local organic farmer called me. He's a friend of mine. He's my godson's father, but he called me last week and said, hey, we're we're growing vegetables. We would like to have a greater impact than just feeding the community. Can we do some community outreach education on best practices? This was all without knowing anything about this particular grant and project. One other example, a year ago, speaking about my concerns about grow practices, a local group that has informal public dances and kind of events at their land said, hey, do you know anybody who can come out and speak to folks before the dance, do some educational stuff? We're not just interested in everybody boogieing down. We're interested in spreading a community culture here. We have a real need for this. Could you do that around planting time, inform folks? This kind of outreach has been requested in the community. People are looking for this. People understand that they're doing it wrong. They'd like to do it right.
Thank you. Thanks. All right. Do I have a motion?
Actually, I have some more questions for staff.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There are 3 components that are being funded through this request. Could you break down the funding for those 3 components for me? How much is going into the outreach, how much is going into the monitoring, and how much is going into the BMP guidance preparation?
Sure, I'm going to bring up staff to help me with that.
For my colleagues' consideration, the reason I'm asking is I'm very supportive of the monitoring and the guidance preparation components. I'm a bit uncomfortable about the outreach, and I think that goes to, my own philosophy. Even though I support outreach and outreach activities, it's harder to realize the outcomes and the benefits of those activities. I asked staff to do a research for me in terms of how much funding we've provided over the years, recent years, for outreach education efforts through the cleanup and abatement account, and it came to almost $6.5 million. And I think the engineer and the quantitative person in me is struggling because there isn't a direct benefit aside from, I appreciate the performance metrics of numbers of flyers and people who attend meetings, but it's much harder to tie the actual outcome and benefits of these activities. And I think what I'm struggling for is I can sense that obviously we all support these type of activities, but there's got to be a better way of measuring the benefits and linking it to the pollution reduction that we all are trying to accomplish. So I'm struggling with just that component of this particular request.
Can I make a suggestion, however? I think it would be an enormous mistake to work out that issue in this relatively small request. I'm happy to have that conversation as the non-engineer organizer attorney, but the human dimension is actually very important, even if not quantifiable. Having spent millions of dollars myself on public outreach in prior jobs, some of it works very well and some of it does not. Some of it is well done, some of it is not. But there is a whole science around it, and I think I think your point is well taken for a conversation to point out, but I would be very opposed to making that decision in this particular grant. It just seems unfair on a relatively small grant to bring up that large of an issue that we need to have a larger discussion about.
So then, could I have a commitment to, because I assume that additional outreach requests will be coming our way. We've seen a lot recently from, for example, the Mercury, that was one of the outreach effort.
Correct.
I'm sure there'll be others coming along the way, that we have DFA staff and others, perhaps through a discussion, with you, based on your experience of giving away money for outreach, to develop better parameters in terms of what is expected from these outreach effort. What are some of the lessons learned in terms of what worked and what didn't? Because looking at the previous $6.5 million that was spent, it's very hard for me to say what was gained by that. I appreciate that shouldn't be a reflection on this particular request that's coming before us, but that's just to give you some background in terms of my unease with this
No,
particular
that makes sense.
request.
I think we should have a conversation. I don't know that you can come up with the same level of metrics, but I think we should be able to look at the latest experience. I mean, there's a huge field in this, so I think it is important to have this conversation so that we do have a way of looking at the proposals that come in front of us, some smaller, some bigger, and it really is going to vary by the nature of the outreach. But there are certainly outreach proposals that are much larger than this as well, and there are going to be lessons learned for both the small community outreach and its value given the community that you're in versus some of the large outreach. And I'm happy to have a very sophisticated conversation about it, and I would suggest we work with DFA, but I'm also going to look at Jonathan to let's have, maybe sit down maybe with Tam and with me, and let's think about where the best resources for this are. And it may well involve a conversation with also some folks like the Water Education Foundation that tends to work on one side. We can talk with some of the folks in LA that I know. I mean, I think it's a very important point. I don't disagree with it at all. I just think it would be a mistake to work that out in any way on this small of a grant at this particular moment without us having talked about it further. The conversation is one we should have. Yeah.
I think that's a good approach, and I would just say on this, I suspect that success will be pretty good because of the community. Also, there's that added element of the community already being engaged, or some in the community that are already engaged. I continue to just, well, I guess the presentation, I'll have to say the presentation was very helpful, as well as the briefing with respect to my concerns about safety. I feel a lot better about it at this point, but I'm still very curious along with this issue about just the success of the outreach. And I'd feel better if we could have a report back. I'm supportive of this, but I'd like to, at an appropriate time, I see that there's a date of the 2016 that the funds need to be expended, so I wouldn't want to pick a date, would just maybe defer to staff on the appropriate time to come back for a report.
That's a good idea, too.
And I'm most interested in what Matt was saying about putting together an irrigated land regulatory package. I think that's going to be one way of measuring success. And so I'm assuming that you will be working with the outreach groups, keeping in mind that you haven't got a regulatory package put together, but one is coming, and it sounds like it's coming fairly quickly. So how are those two efforts, the outreach and your regulatory package, how or are they connected?
It's a great question. So as part of our agricultural lands program, we have a stakeholder engagement process, and we have members of the medical marijuana community that sit on that stakeholder advisory group. And so we would use them as well as the partners in this project to share ideas about the structure and framework related to the permit. I think the issues regarding enrollment and payment of fees are going to be tricky ones to work through. But I think with the governor's funding, I think the expectation is that the permit would have a fee. And so we're going to need to work through that. And we do that by reaching out to our partners on this project.
I have another request, not specific to this item, but specific to just the whole issue in general. Should the governor's budget as proposed be approved with the additional positions in this area, I would suggest, and it's one of the things that I've asked staff in concert with this request, is to put together a coordinated strategy, because even though this particular regional board has been very active, this issue is also relevant to other regional boards as well. And I think it behooves us, especially should the budget be approved with the additional positions, to have a coordinated strategy on addressing this problem.
Excellent suggestion, and that dovetails perhaps in terms of reporting with Dee Dee's suggestion.
Yeah. No, these are all great suggestions. I want to validate this dialogue here and the two, the polar ends of that spectrum. I would just offer that when we kind of extend our, for lack of a better term, our regulatory reach, with new folks in the state, new situations, there's a greater role, I believe, for outreach at that stage. So in the case of this proposal, I can see a stronger role for outreach, just logically, and yet as messaging gets older and older, decadal, the value of outreach then is modified potentially. Just to give it a dimension, there's a time dimension that I really respect in terms of the key issue of human communication. This is a new issue for us, for your board, and the other agencies, and the RCD, and its relationship with the landowners. And so I see a very valid role for outreach at this time. Yeah. Thank you.
So I think what you're hearing is the need to think about and have a more sophisticated outreach strategy and awareness of outreach in general, when appropriate, when not, when measurable, when a little harder to measure. Depends on scale. Some of the time, there's some tools for measuring outreach, if you're big enough to be able to employ those, that are actually pretty sophisticated, that are used in, well, they're used in campaigns, but they're also used in outreach strategies. So we do need to go to school on that, so that as people ask us for funding, or as we propose funding, we have a more sophisticated use of that money and what the metrics are going to be. I do not disagree with Board Member Doduck about the need to be more sophisticated in that, and it's a very good point. I just didn't want to do it in the context of this one grant. That was my only concern.
So we will follow up on that.
Yeah, in the short term. We'll have a plan to follow up in the short term. We can even talk about it later today if you want. Okay. All right, thank you, and thank you very much, all. Now do I have a motion?
Did we want to add a resolve, though, with...
Yes, I would suggest adding a resolve with the request for a check-in, a report, especially on the outreach component, as well. And I don't know if we need a resolved on the point of, because it's not specific just to this request,
Right.
of just, outreach parameters and expectations for outreach requests in general. And of course, the more cohesive, comprehensive, coordinated strategy with respect to this particular issue of marijuana growing.
Yes, which was a good one. We probably should do a workshop or something, given all the regions involved at some point in time in the near future, particularly as Board Member Doduck mentioned, in light of the governor's budget request, and if it goes through.
And I
Miss-
would just add, I would just add safety, report back on the safety issue.
Mr. Loff, are you going to word that?
Well, the one thing I ask is, when Board Member Diadamo had suggested that 2 years was too long, what the Division of Financial Assistance thinks an appropriate time might be to report back on this particular project and its outcomes, if you will. I mean, because otherwise I would default to probably 1 year or 18 months.
Yeah,
Certainly, Mr.
that's what
St.
I'd
John might
default
have-
with, to more 1 year, unless Matt has a better time.
1 year is a good time.
Okay. Then I would just propose that the motion include a new resolved number 4, and then renumber the existing resolve number 4 to number 5. The new resolve 4 would read, and this is fairly open-ended. I mean, certainly the division has the direction. Board Member Diadamos suggested that it include reporting back on safety. Obviously, Board Member Doduck has requested specific report backs on the success, in particular, of the stakeholder outreach, or success or failures, I should say. So I've written this fairly generically. New Resolve 4 would simply read, directs the Division of Financial Assistance to report back within 1 year on the outcomes of this funding, period.
Okay. Okay, now do I have a motion with that included?
Move adoption with the change.
With the caveat of the other two additional requests associated with this item, I will second the motion.
Thank you. Great, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? It carries. Thank you all for your time. Thank those of you who drove a long way to be here. Even more. All right. Moving on to item number 8. Mr. Howard.
Thank you. Item number 8 is a basin plan amendment from the Santa Ana Regional Water Quality Control Board. They've been working for many years to revise recreational standards in a number of, and beneficial uses in a number of their surface waters. And Joanne Schneider is going to lead the presentation. I see Kurt Berchtold, the executive officer, has joined us as well, and Joanne will introduce any other participants.
Thank you. A colleague of mine from the Santa Ana Regional Board, David Welfel, and I think you know David Rice with the Office of Chief Counsel. I am an environmental program manager with the Santa Ana Regional Water Quality Control Board. And I guess I need to know how to operate these slides. Do I? I could begin by saying, and I think you've seen the PowerPoint presentation that I have available. It's actually 2 in 1, with a view toward a short presentation, if that is your pleasure, and a longer presentation if you wish to bear with me. The PowerPoint does include some photographs of our UAA waters, which may be of interest to you.
Can I compromise and have you do the longer one, go through it really fast?
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Could you use the one with the pictures but go really fast? Because
I'd be happy.
pictures are really helpful.
I'd be happy to, or we can just look at pictures as well.
Huh.
So, whatever is your pleasure.
I'll leave it to you. The most direct route to, so that people listening or watching understand what it is that we're talking about. Some of us have been briefed fairly carefully, but there are some people who may not have. And then be sure to get to some pictures if you don't mind.
Be happy to.
Thank you.
Yes. First of all, the Regional Board adopted the Recreation Standards Amendments on June 15th of 2012. The Executive Officer made non-substantive corrections to those amendments on February 12th, 2013 and November 15th, 2013. I want to acknowledge publicly the remarkable commitment of resources by stakeholders in the region to this process to assist the Regional Board in reviewing recreational standards and other aspects of the Basin Plan. We had 54 agencies and about 125 individual stakeholders on our mailing list. Consultant support was funded by 5 funding partners, the stormwater agencies from Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties, parts of which, of course, comprise the region, the Orange County Sanitation District, and the Santa Ana Watershed Project Authority, or SAPA, which also served as the task force facilitator. It was a very open and inclusive process. Any interested party was welcome to participate, and it did require a significant commitment to do so. As you know, we've worked over quite a few years to get to this point. So there was a big commitment of a variety of stakeholders to participate continuously, to review documents and comment on them. The task force was guided by several important principles, and this is true of all task force efforts that we've engaged in the Santa Ana region. First of all, the process has to be objective. We went into this process with a view toward identifying the standards that were right. And whether that meant that more stringent regulation would result or less stringent regulation would result was not the key determinant. Again, we were looking for objectivity. We were also looking for the amendments to comport with the best available science, and also to comport with existing law and regulation. As I said, this was a multi-year process, and the administrative record of this matter is very, very large. And if one has not participated in the meetings and regional board updates over the years, and or have not had an opportunity to review the administrative record in detail, it would be quite possible to miss or fail to appreciate the significant level of effort and also the care and conservatism with which the task force proceeded to develop the amendments. The task force was mindful not just of those guiding principles, the need to be objective, best available science, and compliance with existing law and regulation, but was also very mindful of considerations including environmental justice and the often unique behavior of children when they're around water.
I think you've just got the quote of the day.
Our objectives were to protect public health, to ensure the reasonable protection of beneficial uses, and the overall goal of the task force effort in developing these amendments was to develop a pathogen control strategy that would protect public health and meet legal requirements, and at the same time allow and in fact encourage prioritized use of finite public resources so that we were taking actions and expending those resources where they were most needed. And in the regional board's view, we succeeded in meeting those objectives, and the amendments that the regional board adopted in June of 2012 and that are before you today constitute a significant improvement over the standards that are in the basin plan now and associated implementation strategies. So very briefly, we have a variety of amendments in this package. They include deleting fecal coliform objectives for REC 1 and REC 2. EPA has explicitly disavowed the use of fecal coliform as a reliable indicator of public health risk when recreating in water. We would add instead E. coli objectives for REC 1 waters. Our recommendations are based on U.S. EPA's 1986 criteria. And I would note that the REC 1 waters are also designated REC 2, so where you have REC 1 objectives, those will govern the protection of waters also designated REC 2. The REC 1 objectives therefore obviate the need for separate REC 2 objectives. And moreover, and perhaps more importantly, U.S. EPA has explicitly disavowed or recognized that there is no scientific basis for the REC 2 objectives, whether based on fecal coliform or any other type of bacterial indicator.
I think it might be helpful to tell the audience what REC 2 means.
Excuse me. REC 2 is essentially secondary contact recreation in federal and many states' parlance. It is non-contact recreation that involves proximity to water, but not normally contact with water where the ingestion of water is reasonably possible.
Like
So
boating?
things like tide